Pokrovsk and Mirnograd on the brink of collapse. How critical is the situation for Ukraine and what comes next? We will talk about this with Julian Röpcke, senior political editor at BILD. Julian, glad to see you and thank you for joining us.
Yes, very welcome.
Julian, Russian occupation forces continue their attempts to capture Pokrovsk. To implement their plan to encircle the Pokrovsk agglomeration, the groups of Russian forces that managed to infiltrate the city aim to advance north, west and north of Pokrovsk. The 7th Rapid Response Corps of the Air Assault Forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine reported. What is the current situation in and around Pokrovsk following the latest Russian assaults? How effective have Ukrainian defensive operations been in preventing further Russian advances?
Well, I think the situation in Pokrovsk is really critical for the Ukrainian defenders. We have seen, and Deep State Map has also published videos from across the city, not just in the south, not just on the outskirts, but also in the very west of the city, and also going to the north, almost going to Röpcke, where Russian invaders have a presence. And it's not like they are running around like chicken. It is they have established real positions there. You can see of one of the intercepted Russian drone footage that they are operating their kamikaze drones from within Pokrovsk. Which is, I think, quite remarkable because this means they have lines of logistics going into the city. And all in all, I think from Ukrainian sources, what I hear and what I think is realistic is that the Russians have so far around 500 infiltrators in Pokrovsk, and the Ukrainians are defending with maybe 1,200 to 1,500 soldiers. So this is not much more, especially when you see, and this is what the 7th Corpus here was saying, when the Russians have 11,000 people around to also attack from numerous sides. So I think it is a very, very critical situation for Pokrovsk. With logistics being almost cut off. You were showing this, it's a couple of kilometers, but also now, I mean, even if you have a street there, you have seen this from some of the brigades involved, I think the 38th Brigade, Marine Brigade, they have to go everything by foot, everything has to be carried. They go in with drones and ammunition and they go out with the wounded. Everyone has to be carried. So it's a terrible situation. In Mirnograd, it's a little different. I think Mirnograd has not been so much the Russian focus over the past weeks because they knew if they cut Pokrovsk, then Mirnograd will be also cut off. But very recently, until the last 2 days, Russian forces began to attack Mirnograd. You can see this also that it's now inside the city limits. That's this gray area. And it's, I think, quite remarkable, and I would also say quite bad, that the Ukrainian army spokesperson first said, yes, there's fighting in Mirnograd yesterday, and then later the Eastern Command said, no, this was a mistake, there's no fighting in Mirnograd, everything is under control. I'm in contact myself with Ukrainian soldiers in Mirnograd, and they confirm that the Russians are there and they are fighting them.
Julian, to make it clear for our audience, what role does Pokrovsk and Mirnograd play strategically in the border defense of eastern Ukraine? And you said about 11,000 Russian troops. How significant is the reported deployment of approximately 11,000 Russian troops for this operation?
Well, we know that altogether the Russians have 1 million soldiers. Some people say even 1.5 million soldiers in Ukraine. So 11,000 is not the biggest force, but you may not forget that many of them are dying. You may not forget that the Ukrainians are killing between, I think just in Pokrovsk and Mirnograd area, between 200 and 500 Russian soldiers are being killed every day. So the Russians have to send reinforcements always, every day, because many are killed of the attacking forces. So this is quite a lot they're having there. And second question was about the strategic implications. Well, to be very honest, I think the strategic role for Pokrovsk is very limited now for the Ukrainian army because all the streets in and out, all the railways in and out, everything is cut. I mean, Pokrovsk is not a knot anymore. It's not a logistical knot, a hub anymore, like it was some 1 year ago, like also Konstantinovka, where I visited so often. It was a little bit further to the northeast. It was a logistical hub. It was where the Ukrainian soldiers were even relaxing. It was where everyone was going to have a good time, not at the front line. And everything there is hell now. I mean, the city is almost destroyed by the Russians. So the strategic implications are very small for the Ukrainian army, I would say, but the symbolic implications are giant, of course. You can see this. Fortunately, no one called Pokrovsk a fortress like we saw in Bakhmut, but still losing another big agglomeration. And you may not forget that the agglomeration of Pokrovsk and Myrnograd together was more than 100,000 people. So that's a big area. I mean, that's a big also civilian area. Losing this is a symbolic big defeat, I would say. Otherwise, the Ukrainians wouldn't defend it, although they are semi-encircled there. And for the Russians, unfortunately, I think the strategic implications are better. If they capture Pokrovsk, and even if it's ruins, even if they have nothing to have a nice place, nothing to relax, but just the ruins to live in and to hide in, this will give them another boost, just like what we saw in Bakhmut or what we saw in Turets. This is where they can hide in the cellars, in the basement, where they can have their drone forces, where they can even have better logistics in terms of cars being able to go to the city limits from the eastern side, and then everything can be moved to the west by foot or in the darkness. So I think, unfortunately, right now, from a strategic point of view, it is more important for the Russians to capture it than for the Ukrainians to defend it. But symbolically, of course, Ukraine does not want, and the Ukrainian government does not need another big defeat here.
Julian, you said about logistic. What are the likely logistical and supply challenges facing not only Ukrainian forces in this area, but Russian? And what lessons from previous battles in eastern Ukraine could be applied to this situation? You mentioned Bakhmut.
Yeah. So first about the logistics, I think we have a 20-kilometer wide death area along the front line, going at least 10 kilometers to each side of the contact line. And it's just practical for both sides. These little kamikaze drones, the Ukrainians fortunately have millions of them. They are being used. And this is why most of the Russian vehicles are being destroyed, which are sent to the front lines, and also most tanks and infantry fighting vehicles. We have just seen this in Myrnograd and Shachove some days ago. Most of them, or at least half of them, are getting destroyed. So this is something which is true for both sides. Maybe you remember that it's hard to see any Ukrainian military vehicles close to the front line here recently. I've seen one BTR-4 of the Azov Corps in Röpcke, and this was the only vehicle I've seen there. Everything else is just far away from the front line, because the Ukrainian army knows if we are sending tanks like Leopard 2, Abrams, or if we are sending Marder infantry fighting vehicles from Germany, they will probably be destroyed. So this is true for both sides. The Russians don't care so much. That's why, and they also have more stuff. That's why they are sending in sometimes, I think 29 armored vehicles in Shachove some days ago. And they lost 12, I think. This is what the Ukrainians said. So 50% almost survived this, and they set down their infantry and went back. Why? Because the Russians were waiting. They were waiting for the bad weather period. It's not only bad weather on the ground when it comes to the ground situation, the swamps, but it's also bad weather in the skies, which means Ukraine cannot start so many drones. They can start them much later. You may not forget, as you know, I've just been with a Shark unit, a Ukrainian drone Shark unit. You can start an FPV kamikaze drone when the clouds are low, but you cannot see where the enemy is. You cannot have the Shark or the Quantum, Vector or something like this, or Fly Eye. You cannot not have them in the air because they need at least 1,500 meters altitude of the clouds. If you don't have this, you cannot observe your enemy. So you just see it last minute when it almost approaches your position, and then you can start the kamikaze drones. So this is really bad there, I think, for both sides. And this is why also some hopes were premature, I would say, in the summer, saying the Russians don't have any more tanks. Of course they have more tanks. Of course they have many more fighting vehicles. They were just not used for many months, because the idea was to save them for bad weather time, for when the Ukrainians cannot defend so well as they could in the summer. And now you can suddenly see again, after months of only infantry attacks, you can suddenly see again that every week, I think at least 50 to 100 Russian armored fighting vehicles are used, and at least half of them are getting destroyed.
Julian, about Kupiansk, fierce fighting continues in the Kupiansk area of the Kharkiv region, where Russian occupation forces are attempting to gain a foothold in the northern part of the city. However, reports of any encirclement of Ukrainian troops are unfounded. The Joint Forces Group reported this on Wednesday. What is the current tactical situation in the northern part of Kupiansk? How are Ukrainian forces maintaining their defensive positions amid the intensified fighting?
Yeah, also there's no real encirclement. This is absolutely true. There's no encirclement in Kupiansk. But of course, you have still some square kilometers east of the Oskil River under Ukrainian control. And if Kupiansk falls, so if all the bridges and even the pontoon bridges, if they are getting destroyed, then Ukrainian forces, not in Kupiansk, but east of the Oskil, in Kharkiv Oblast, they have a big problem there. So that's why Kupiansk is still strategic, and that's why it's also a dangerous situation. But yes, you were saying northern Kupiansk, I fear, and this is also confirmed by Deep State Map and other Ukrainian bloggers, I fear that Russian troops have been visible in the very western and also very much southern areas of Kupiansk. Again, everything only on the western side of the Oskil. On the eastern side of the Oskil, the Ukrainian defense is holding. But of course, just as in Pokrovsk, the Russians are attempting to go down and break through as much west as possible, because then the eastern troops are cut off. And this is their aim. So that's why we don't see so many attacks on the other side. Yeah, you can see on your map that the red one goes up to the center, up to the only bridges, and the gray area goes to the very south of Kupiansk. So in the end, we have the same problem as in Pokrovsk. There are not enough Ukrainian infantrymen. There is no real front line anymore. There is not a contact line where you can say the Russians are on the right and the Ukrainians are on the left. But instead, because if you have so many big holes, and sometimes it's kilometer-wide holes in the front lines where there are no Ukrainian units, as soon as the weather gets worse and you cannot have reconnaissance drones there over the whole time and see, okay, we don't have troops there, but we see the Russians moving, so we can kill them if they go there. If you don't have this anymore, and this is the situation right now, you can unfortunately, like in Kupiansk, like in Pokrovsk, see hundreds and hundreds of Russian troops going behind the Ukrainian line, and we just saw this, some war crimes in the center of Pokrovsk, then attacking Ukrainian soldiers far behind the front, and even killing the wounded, as we have seen this crime of at least one Russian soldier.
Julian, how does this phase of fighting relate to Russia's broader strategy in the Kharkiv direction?
Yeah, well, I think Kharkiv is one of the areas where you can see that the Russians are even lying to themselves. They didn't annex Kharkiv, but they have a big offensive there going on. So everything they are saying, even to the Americans, when they say, yes, the Ukrainians just have to leave Donetsk Oblast. No, they want the same for all of Ukraine. They want to destroy all of Ukraine. In Sumy, luckily, the Russian offensive was stopped. We did not see any liberation, by the way. I think we spoke about this 2 months ago. There's still no liberation. There's a fixed front, a frozen front, if you want so, north of Sumy city. But in Kharkiv, unfortunately, we can see that the Russians are going forward. And you could also see this recently, that the Russians were alleging that they were building a buffer zone, going back to Kharkiv, that they captured more little villages there. I think Odratne was one, Milove was one, and it's all a little northwest of Kupiansk. And yeah, and you can see there, even from the Deep State Map, that they are alleging that this is a buffer zone. In reality, of course, they are not coming from the from the border area, but they are coming from Luhansk area, where they're coming from the east going to the west. So all in all, I think the Russians want to occupy as much as possible of Ukraine. They didn't succeed in Sumy, luckily. This offensive, they're stalled, and they just have their 12 or 11 villages. But in Kharkiv, they see a chance because they can attack from two sides, from the north, from Belgorod Oblast, where they go over the border, and from the east, from Luhansk, where they attack. And wherever they have these two-side possibilities, I was myself in Kurachovo last year, so I know what I'm talking about. Wherever they can attack from the east and from another direction, there they are going forward. And this is why they already are 20 kilometers deep in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast right now. This is another big problem for the Ukrainian army, that in the south, they're advancing from the eastern side and from the southern side in Zaporizhzhia Oblast and Dnipropetrovsk Oblast.
Julian, you mentioned Belgorod region, and let's talk about this because a strike by a Ukrainian drone on a dam in Russia's Belgorod region has caused large-scale flooding and severely disrupted the logistics of Russian forces near the Ukrainian city of Vovchansk. Parts of the Russian army's units have been cut off from their main forces after water from the Belgorod Reservoir flooded their trenches. How extensive is the flooding caused by the breach, and which areas are most affected? How has the flooding impacted Russian military operations near Vovchansk?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the Ukrainian army used this tactic. I think it was not a drone, it was HIMARS, I think. This is what really penetrated the dam and what also made the water come through. I think it's in Röpcke area of the Russian side, and this releases some pressure from Vovchansk. Also in Vovchansk, you had sort of a frozen not conflict, but a frozen front line for more than a year. But over the past 3 months, maybe you saw that the Russians advanced in the industrial area of Vovchansk, which was under Ukrainian control. So there were advances by them, unfortunately, and these are stored now, or at least they are slowed down now by the situation that they have some flooding there, not only in their trenches, as you are showing right now, but also on their supply routes. So this is something, of course, the Ukrainians used. I think it was quite open. Everyone saw that it was the Ukrainian attack happening there. And yes, I mean, this is a mean of war which was chosen there to slow down at least this direction of Kharkiv, which of course makes militarily a lot of sense.
So as I understand, the flooding created new tactical advantages for Ukrainian forces along the border area.
Well, if the Ukrainian army would have forces to counterattack there, they could do it, but they don't. That's the problem. So it's for stabilization of the front line. Yes, it's an advantage, yes, but it only brings you in a position where you don't have to pull back within Vovchansk and not lose one factory area or one little street after another, which was unfortunately happening in western Vovchansk area where the industrial quarter is over the past, as I said, 2 or 3 months. So yes, it's a bigger disadvantage, of course, for the Russians if they not just have drones attacking them, but also water until their knees. Then they use their Bukhanka, as you could see. So this helps them. This helps the Ukrainians stabilize the front line. But again, if you talk about strategic advantages, this sounds like you would be able to counterattack. But I think most Ukrainian soldiers now are busy holding the front line in Pokrovsk, in Kupiansk, in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. So I think, unfortunately, there is no force there to counterattack.
Bilan, we talked a lot about situation on the front line. What message would you like to convey to Ukrainians, allies, and international partners regarding the current situation?
Well, the message is the same since 2022. You have to do much more to win this war. And this goes out to Germany. This goes out to the Americans, which are unfortunately only selling weapons right now to NATO countries, which are then being sold to Ukraine. But especially to our neighbors in Europe, I think. Germany is paying 8 billion euros per year to Ukraine. Other countries are doing much less, also in percentage of their GDP. And unfortunately, the sense of urgency still seems to not be there, especially in Western and Southern Europe. And to the Ukrainian government, I mean, I'm always saying the same. If you want to stop the Russians, you need more soldiers. That's the easy calculation. It's not so much about drones there. It's not so much about, I don't know what to say. It's just a very bad situation because I can easily say this here from Germany because I'm not under the CAP bombs. I'm not under the FRB bombs. So I know very well if the Ukrainian army sends more soldiers to the front line, it will lose more soldiers at the front line. I think that's totally clear. But so far, I'm not really sure about the Ukrainian strategy because what they are doing in Russia, bombing refineries and so on, it surely hurts, but it doesn't change the war. It doesn't change the dynamic on the ground. You can see this. They're doing since June, I think, and still the Russians are advancing around 500 to 600 square kilometers per month in Ukraine, which is a lot. Every 2 months, they are sizing the area of Berlin, the capital of Germany, where I'm here. So it's hard to advise anything to a government when you know the outcome will be more deaths. But militarily speaking, the more soldiers you have to guard the front, the fewer chances you have for the Russians to sneak in and then kill your drone operators 5 kilometers behind the front from behind.
Iran and Russia continue to bomb Ukrainian cities, Ukrainian infrastructure. In many of our regions, emergency and rescue operations are ongoing following last night's Russian attack. The enemy carried out a complex combined strike. More than 650 drones and over 50 missiles of various types, including ballistic and air ballistic weapons, were used. What lessons can be drawn about the adaptability and resilience of Ukrainians' air defense network, and also about tactic by Russians?
Yeah, well, you see the results yourself. It's terrible. I think it's 2 or 3 killed and more than 50 wounded. I think this is what President Zelensky said. And you see that a lot of property was destroyed. Civilians were destroyed. I just saw a video myself of a Shahed attacking a fuel station in Sumy. So the Russians, unfortunately, have enough resources to even pick single fuel stations. And from what we are seeing here, I just don't know how well the Ukrainian air defense is working. I think the official information from the government is like every day they are shooting down 80 to 90 to 95%. If this is true, and the 5% we are seeing is causing such a damage in Ukraine, then it's really a terrible sign, because then it's really visible how much firepower Russia has every day, or not every day, but every second or third day, let's put it this way. It also shows that as long as they can produce these 500 drones per day, Shahed drones and others in Yelabuga and beyond, then they will use them against Ukraine. So the only way to stop this is to destroy the drone factories in Yelabuga and beyond. If this is not happening, I think the terrible pictures we saw from this morning from women and children being injured and crying, it will continue.
Julian, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us and for your steadfast support of Ukraine. It's very important. Your insightful insights and commitment to highlighting the situation are greatly appreciated. I need to say that Julian Röpcke, senior political editor at BILD, was with us today. Thank you so much for your time, and see you.
Thank you. All the best and stay alive.